The night has a way of hiding the things we aren't ready to face during the bright light of day. We step into the darkness to bring you the secrets, the mysteries, and the deep revelations that others fear. Click subscribe now and witness what remains in the shadows.
Orchestrated original revenge narrative with fresh character names and consistent setting details. Orchestrated original revenge narrative with fresh character names and consistent setting details. 2 chairs in the front row stayed empty the entire night, and every single one of our 190 guests knew exactly whose they were. My mother and father didn't come to my wedding. They told me weeks before that if I wouldn't move my date, I shouldn't expect to see them there, and they meant it. My father said it to my face in his study, in that flat deal-maker voice he used on customers who tried to talk him down on a truck. "Maybe missing this will teach you a little gratitude," he said. "A little humility." I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't beg. I drove home and I shook in the passenger seat while my husband held the wheel with one hand and my knee with the other, and I told myself I was done. What they didn't know, what nobody in that room knew except the two of us, was that my husband had spent the previous 3 weeks pulling apart my family's finances, thread by thread, and that at 8:40 that night, after the toasts, he was going to stand up with a microphone and a folder of paper and say one sentence that would unmake my parents in front of everyone they'd spent 30 years performing for. I knew it was coming. I'd helped him build it. And I still wasn't ready for what it did to the room. Let me start where it actually started, because the wedding was the end of something, not the beginning. My name is Camille. I'm 30, an ER nurse at a hospital outside Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of job where you come home with somebody else's blood dried on your forearm and you're too tired to be angry about anything that isn't bleeding. My husband is Miles. He's a forensic accountant, which is a fancy way of saying companies pay him to find the money other people hid, and that detail matters more than it should, so hold on to it. We got engaged in November of 2023 on the dock behind his parents' place on Watmalaw Island, where the marsh goes gold right before the sun drops. He'd strung lights up himself and gotten one of them tangled and spent 45 minutes cursing at it before I got there, which I only found out later. The ring was his grandmother's, worn thin on one side from 60 years on her hand. When I said yes, I felt, for about a week, like the luckiest woman in the Low Country. I called my parents the next morning. My mother cried. I thought they were happy tears. I genuinely did. My father got on the line and said, "Well, good for you, sweetheart. We'll do this right." I should have written that sentence down somewhere I couldn't lose it, because later I'd want proof that there had ever been a version of them that meant it. A few weeks after that, at Sunday dinner in the house I grew up in. Big place out toward Mount Pleasant, the kind with a wine fridge nobody ever needed. My mother set down her fork and got this soft look on her face. "Your grandfather left something for this," she said. "For you." I knew about my grandfather's trust, the way you know about a thing you've never expected to touch. My grandfather, Edmund, built Ashcroft Building Supply from one lumberyard into 9 stores across 3 counties. He was the only person in that family who ever looked at me and saw me instead of seeing how useful I was being. When he died in 2019, he left a trust, $140,000, and a small block of shares in the company, earmarked for the first grandchild to marry, to be used, in the language of the document, to build a home and a family. That was me. I was the oldest grandchild. There was no ambiguity. My mother said it like a gift she was personally bestowing. "Grandpa would have wanted to walk you down the aisle," she said, and dabbed her eyes, and for one stupid minute I let myself feel held by people who were already planning to rob me. You have to understand the shape of my family to understand the rest of it. I have a younger brother. His name is Spencer. He's 27, and from the time he could talk he was the son. The whole house orbited. Spencer got the tutors. Spencer got the gap year. Spencer got the he's just figuring himself out. While I got the Camille's, so dependable she doesn't need us hovering. When I graduated nursing school at the top of my cohort, my father said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to the game. When Spencer dropped out of his second college to go into wellness, my parents threw him a dinner and called it brave. By the time I'm telling you about, Spencer had a startup. A wellness app, sleep tracking, breathing exercises, the kind of thing that's either $1 billion or nothing. He called it Lumen. My parents had already put something like $200,000 into it over 3 years and called it believing in him. I'd stopped saying anything. There's no point arguing with people about the weather. And to them, Spencer was the weather. Miles and I booked our venue in March of 2024, the Cypress Grove Pavilion out at Magnolia Bend, an old rice plantation turned event space along the Ashley River. Live oaks dripping with moss, room for 200. 18 months out. We put down an $8,000 deposit, non-refundable, split it from our own savings, and signed for Saturday, May 17, 2025. I texted my mother a photo of the pavilion. She wrote back within minutes, "Camille, this is perfect. Spring weddings down. There are gorgeous, we can't wait." I saved that text too. I'm a saver. It's the one habit that ended up mattering. The trouble came in February of 2025, 3 months out. Spencer posted on his Instagram. He had something like 80,000 followers by then, all of them apparently real. A video of himself jumping around his apartment, because Lumen had gotten into some accelerator program that culminated at Web Summit in Lisbon, the big tech conference in Portugal, investor meetings. A pitch slot. The whole thing was the second week of May. I remember scrolling past it and thinking nothing, because Spencer was always flying somewhere. Then my mother called me at work. I stepped out by the ambulance bay to take it. "It's about your date," she said, and her voice already had the strain in it I knew too well. "What about my date?" "Spencer's conference is in Lisbon the week of the 17th. This is enormous for him, Camille. There are investors flying in just to see Lumen, and the timing is, well, it overlaps. Is there any way you'd consider moving the wedding? Even just a few weeks? Or the fall?" I stood there in the heat off the asphalt, and I actually laughed. One sharp note. "Mom, we booked 18 months ago. We've sent invitations to 190 people. My dress is being altered. The florist contract is signed. I understand it's an inconvenience." "It's not an inconvenience. It's my wedding. Spencer's whole future could turn on this trip. You can get married any weekend. He gets one shot at this room." I told her no. Calmly the first time. She went quiet, then cold, and said, "I'll talk to your father," and hung up on me in the ambulance bay, while a guy with a nail through his hand waited for me inside. My father called that night. The deal-maker voice, "Camille, this is about family. Your brother's company is at a turning point. Your wedding is a party. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word does something to a person who spent her whole childhood being the easy one. It went into me like a splinter you can't find to pull out. One daughter is a doctor. The other one, we'd lose thousands. Money's not the point. Respect is, respect for your brother. A pause. "Then we've got a problem." And he hung up too. They were big on hanging up. I'm not going to pretend I was a fortress that whole time, because the comments people leave on stories like mine always want the woman to be a fortress from page 1, and that's not how it works. There was a night, about a week in, where I lay in the dark and seriously thought maybe I should just move it. Maybe I was tearing the family apart. Maybe I was the problem. I rolled over and said it out loud to Miles, "What if I'm being selfish?" And he didn't reach for me right away. He sat up and turned the lamp on so I'd have to look at him. "You booked a date, and 190 people build their May around it," he said. Your brother booked a conference after the fact, and your parents want you to eat the loss. That's not selfish. That's having a boundary. There's a difference, and you know there's a difference. You're just tired. I held on to that. There's a difference. I'd need it. What I didn't move on was the date, and that turned out to be the thing they couldn't forgive. They demanded a sit-down. We drove out to the house on a Tuesday. The AC was blasting and my palms were still wet. Spencer was on speakerphone from somewhere with a cafe behind him, not even bothering to be in the room for the meeting about whether my life would be rearranged for his. My mother had her hands folded, like she was about to lead a prayer. My father stood at the window with his arms crossed. The way he stood when a deal was going sideways and he wanted you to feel small. We have a compromise, my mother said. You move it to October. We'll help cover the change fees. Everyone wins. The change fees would be $12,000 to $15,000, I said. And we'd lose our date and our vendors. We'd start over. Well, offering to help, my father said, like he was being magnanimous. Spencer's voice crackled in from the phone. I mean, I already locked my flight, so. Something in me clicked over, quiet and final. No, I said, the date stays. My father turned from the window and his face had gone to stone. Then we have a problem, he said again, like it was a chorus. My mother started to cry. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. As we walked to the car, she stood in the doorway weeping for the neighbors, and my father didn't look at me at all. The next morning, I woke up to a text from him, time-stamped 6:48 a.m. Since you've chosen this, don't expect our support. You're on your own. Your mother is heartbroken. Your grandfather's money was meant for a wedding that honored this family. This doesn't. You'll get nothing. I read it 3 times and handed the phone to Miles. Can they do that? I asked. Legally? His jaw tightened in a way I didn't recognize yet. I don't know, he said. But I'm going to find out. For 6 weeks, they didn't speak to me. I called my mother 4 times. Voicemail. My father, twice, straight to voicemail. The read receipts showed me they were seeing my texts and choosing nothing. I sent one I'm still embarrassed about, late one night. Mom, can we please just talk? I miss you. It sat there marked, read at 11:52 p.m. with no reply, and that was the last time I ever reached for them. That was the moment I stopped. People who've never been the unfavorite child don't understand how long it takes to stop, and how it only takes once to finally do it. Meanwhile, Spencer posted 20-some times about Lisbon. My parents liked every single one. So proud of you. You earned this. They didn't acknowledge a single thing about my wedding. Not the countdown, not the dress, nothing. And Miles, who I thought was just quietly furious on my behalf, was doing something else entirely. He was digging. He told me on a Thursday, 3 weeks out, when an email came in that turned everything. It was from our venue coordinator at Magnolia Bend. Subject line: conflicting instructions. Please advise. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. She wrote that she'd received several messages about my event and wanted to confirm with me directly before acting on anything. Attached were 3 emails, all from my mother. The first, from a month earlier. This is the mother of the bride. We need to discuss moving the May 17th event. What are our options? The second, I understand there are penalties. This is a family emergency and I'm trying to protect my daughter from the mistake. Surely there's flexibility. The third, dated 9 days before the wedding. This event should not go forward on this date. I'm asking you, mother, to help me stop it. My own mother had tried to cancel my wedding behind my back. 3 times. I forwarded it to Miles with my hand shaking and just typed she tried to cancel it. He called me inside of a minute. Come home, he said, low and even. I've been working on something and it's bigger than you think. That night, he set his laptop on the kitchen table. and pulled out a chair for me like I was a client. "You know I do this for a living," he said, following money. "So when your dad sent that text about your grandfather's trust, I wanted to know if they could actually withhold it. Trusts are governed by documents and by law, not by whether your father's in a mood. So I asked your Aunt Marjorie for a copy of the trust instrument. She had it because your grandfather named her a contingent something or other. And then I asked a few questions I'm allowed to ask, and I pulled what I'm allowed to pull." He turned the screen toward me. A trust account. In January of 2025, it held exactly what my grandfather had left. 140,000 in cash, plus the shares. "Now look," he said, and clicked. February 9th. A withdrawal. $95,000. I couldn't breathe. To who? He clicked again. The recipient was Lumen LLC, Spencer's company. The memo line read, "Founder Capital Contribution." 5 days, I whispered. This was 5 days before Mom called me about the date. I know. They had already taken the money before they ever asked me to move my wedding. The whole thing. The compromise, the tears. This is about family. The "you'll get nothing." All of it was theater performed over a hole they'd already dug. My grandfather's money, the money with my name on it, the money meant for me to build a home, was sitting inside my brother's wellness app. Miles pulled up the trust document and read the line out loud, slow, like he wanted me to hear every word the way a court would. "The trustees shall hold and distribute the trust solely for the benefit of the first grandchild upon her marriage, to be used for the establishment of a home and family." He looked at me. "Your parents are the trustees. A trustee has a legal duty, fiduciary duty, to act only in the beneficiary's interest. Moving 95,000 of your money into a company your brother owns isn't a gray area. It's a breach. It might be theft. And I can prove every step of it on paper." I sat there with my grandfather's face in my head, and I felt the grief turn into something with a spine. "What do we do?" I said. "Two things," Miles said. "One, we build a case and you get every dollar back and then some. And two," he hesitated, watching me, "at the reception, if you want, we show everyone exactly what they did. Because they didn't just steal from you. They walked out of your wedding to humiliate you in front of 200 people and called it teaching you humility. I think the people in that room deserve to know what humility actually cost. But it's your wedding. Your call." I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the trust with my name on it, being fed to the golden child, while I was being lectured about gratitude. I thought about learn a little humility. "Show them everything," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, Miles built it the way he'd build a case for court. Bank records of the 95,000 transfer. The trust instrument with the beneficiary language flagged. My father's text, "You'll get nothing." And my mother's, the one where she finally said they'd come to the wedding. But, in her words, only to teach me humility. My mother's 3 emails to the venue. Screenshots of Spencer's Lisbon posts, and one more thing Miles found at the very end, the night before, around 11, when he called me into the living room with that look. Another transfer, March 3rd, 3 weeks after the 95,000, 2 weeks before the wedding. $11,400 out of my father's personal account. Memo line, Lumen Lisbon Travel and Booth. They'd paid for Spencer's conference trip directly, after telling me they had nothing for me, after telling me money wasn't the point. I laughed, and it came out wrong, almost a sob. "They paid for it themselves," I said. "They didn't even need the trust for the trip. They just wanted the trip, and his company, and my silence." Miles put it all in a plain folder. No slideshow, no theatrics. That wasn't him. Just a folder and a voicemail he'd saved off my phone. The one where my mother's recorded voice said the word humility out loud. He printed 3 copies of the folder. He didn't tell me what he'd do with the copies. The morning of May 17th, I woke at 6 a.m. in the bridal suite at Magnolia Bend with my heart already going. Hair at 8, ceremony at 4, reception at 7. And somewhere in that day, my parents would either come or they wouldn't. At 9:30, Spencer posted from Lisbon a photo of himself grinning in front of a conference banner. Caption, biggest week of my life. Sometimes you just have to bet on yourself. My maid of honor, Priya, saw my face and tried to take my phone. Too late. But honestly, it made everything easier. There's a clarity that comes when the last little hope dies. At 2:30, a text came in from my mother. We'll be there. Don't expect us to pretend we're happy. I turned my phone off. At 3:45, there was a knock. My uncle Russell, my father's younger brother, 50-something, runs a heating and air company. The kind of man who shows up with a truck when your basement floods. 2 days earlier, I'd called and asked if he'd walk me down the aisle. Because my father had refused. Russell said yes before I finished the sentence. Your daddy's making the biggest mistake of his life, he'd told me. I'd be honored. Now he stood in the doorway in a gray suit with his eyes a little red and said, Ready, kiddo? Through the window I could see guests arriving. And I could see my parents. Back corner. Far from everyone. My father in his good suit looking like he was attending a deposition. 2 empty white chairs sat in the front row with their name cards still on them. My mother had insisted on that, I think, so everyone would have to look at the absence. The ceremony started at 4 under the oaks. 170 or so people actually came. A few distant relatives had heard the family was at war and stayed home. Priya and the others walked down. Miles's little niece scattered petals. Then it was me, on Russell's arm. And I kept my eyes on Miles the whole walk because he mouthed, You've got this, and I needed it. Our officiant got to the part every officiant gets to. If anyone objects, speak now. And there was a sound from the back. My father stood up. Gasps moved through the rows like wind through the moss. Camille, he said, loud enough to carry. Your mother and I are leaving. Think about what you've done to this family. He took my mother's elbow and they walked out down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the slate, her shoulders shaking for the audience. 40-some people on the Ashcroft side sat frozen. Nobody breathed for what felt like a year. Russell leaned in. Keep going, honey, he said. I looked at the officiant. My voice came out level, which surprised me. Please continue. He cleared his throat. Love is patient, he read. Love is kind. We said our vows. When Miles got to the end of his, he went off script and said, Camille, in front of everyone here, I promise I will always stand up for you, no matter who's watching. I didn't know yet how literally he meant it. We kissed. People cried, some of them still in shock. As we came back up the aisle, I caught my Aunt Marjorie sobbing, mouthing, I'm so sorry. And I smiled at her, because I knew that in 4 hours, sorry wouldn't be the word that mattered. Cocktail hour was all whispers. Did they really leave? Are they coming back? I gave everyone the same answer. They made their choice. Miles moved through the crowd calm as still water. But I saw him check his watch. At the family photos I told the photographer, just my husband's side. She looked confused. Miles fixed his tie. The reception was in the old rice barn, lights crisscrossing the rafters, 20 round tables. The DJ announced us. We danced to something slow and for 3 minutes it felt almost like a normal wedding. Except for table 2 at the front, where 2 chairs sat empty with the cards still standing. Ashcroft. Ashcroft. Everyone saw them. They were meant to. Dinner came. I couldn't eat, neither could Miles. At 8:25 the toasts started. The best man, Trevor, doing his funny stories. Priya doing the sweet ones that made everybody cry. And then the DJ said, and now a few words from the groom. Miles stood and took the microphone, and the room settled. He looked at me. I nodded. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said. "Especially those of you who stayed after the interruption during the ceremony." A few nervous laughs. I'm not a public speaking guy. But something happened in this family that I'm not willing to let stay quiet, and after tonight, I don't think you'll want it to either. He held up the folder. Camille's father told her this week that missing her wedding might teach her some humility, some gratitude. I want to show you what that humility actually cost and who's been paying for it. He opened the folder. Camille's grandfather, Edmund Ashcroft. A lot of you knew him. Built 9 stores from one lumberyard and left a trust when he passed. $140,000 set aside for his oldest grandchild to use when she married. To build a home. That's Camille. He paused. Not her brother. Camille. He pulled the first page. On February 9th of this year, $95,000 was moved out of that trust into Lumen LLC, her brother's company. 5 days before Camille's mother first called to ask her to move this wedding for that same brother's trip, the money was already gone before they ever asked. The room had gone completely silent. I watched it land table by table, people leaning forward, hands going to mouths. 2 weeks before today, Miles went on, his voice even, almost gentle, which was worse than shouting. $11,400 came out of her father's own account to pay for that trip, so when they told Camille they had nothing for her, they had $95,000 of her money in her brother's app, and they had $11,000 for his plane ticket. They just didn't have it for her. My Aunt Marjorie stood up at her table with her hand over her mouth. 3 people near her were crying. Miles read my mother's emails to the venue out loud, every word, ending with, "I'm asking you, Mother, to help me stop it." Somebody said, "Oh my God," into the quiet. My Uncle Russell stood, looked at the empty chair where his brother should have been, and said clear across the barn, "Lord forgive me, that man," and sat back down. Then Miles did the one thing I hadn't braced for. He nodded to the DJ, and over the speakers came a voicemail. My mother's voice, 10 seconds of it, saying the words herself. "We'll come, but we won't pretend. This is to teach you humility, Camille." He let it play once. Then he set the microphone down halfway, picked it back up, and said the last thing. Camille didn't learn humility this week. She learned who her family actually is. He laid 3 copies of the folder on the table. "If anyone needs these for legal reasons or any other reason, they're right here." Then he walked over, took my hand, and sat down beside me. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. 10. Then my Aunt Marjorie started to clap, slow. And Russell stood and clapped, and then Miles's parents, and then table by table the whole barn was on its feet. Not cheering, exactly. Something graver than cheering. 160-some people standing up because they'd been shown the truth and didn't want to be the kind of people who stayed seated for it. It went on close to a minute and a half. A handful of guests, a couple of my father's golfing buddies, a cousin or two from his side, grabbed their jackets and left while everyone else stood. The ones who left told you everything about who they were. Marjorie came to me with her mascara ruined. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "I swear to you, Camille, I didn't know." My cousin, who'd been at my father's table, walked outside with her phone pressed to her ear, pacing, gesturing, calling him, I bet. My own phone, face down and silent on the table, lit up over and over. 30-some notifications by the time I flipped it. Miles turned his all the way off. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight we dance." And we did. The DJ, after a stunned beat, said, "Well, let's keep this party going." And the floor filled up. And I'm not going to lie to you. It became the best party I have ever been to in my life. People needed somewhere to put what they were feeling, and they put it into dancing. Around 11, Trevor grabbed the mic for an unscheduled second toast. To Miles for having a backbone, and to Camille for never needing anyone's permission to be exactly who she is. The barn roared. At nearly midnight, my aunt hugged me at the door and said, "Your grandfather would be so proud of you. Not for tonight. For you." That's when I finally cried. Good tears, for once. The rest moved fast, the way these things do once the dam goes. By Sunday morning, the story was loose. 3 of Miles's cousins had posted about the speech. One post crossed 2,000 shares by lunch. The comments were merciless toward my parents and toward Lumen. Someone made a hashtag with my name on it that I'll never get used to seeing. By Monday, a local station had called Miles's voicemail asking for comment about an incident at a Magnolia Bend wedding involving the Ashcroft family. We didn't have to do anything. It spread on its own, the way the truth does once enough people are standing up for it. A trust litigation attorney named Quentin Marsh called me that week, silver-haired, 25 years doing exactly this, and said he'd seen the posts and wanted the case. He went through Miles's folder in his office over the Ashley River and then set it down and said, "This is about as clean as these get. Your parents, as trustees, moved trust assets to a non-beneficiary. Breach of fiduciary duty, plain conversion of your property. You're owed full restoration plus damages." He did the math on a legal pad. The trust principal, the value the shares should have grown to, punitive damages for the self-dealing, his fees on top. He landed at about $208,000. "If they fight it, 6 months," he said. "They won't fight it. The publicity will settle it for us." He filed in county court. The papers were served to my parents on a Friday. That afternoon, I got a text from Uncle Russell. "Your daddy called me screaming that you're destroying the family name. I told him he did that himself when he walked down your aisle and out the door." He hung up on me. I framed that text in my head where the begging one used to live. Here's the part the people who follow these stories always want, and for once they get it, because I wanted it too. It didn't stop at my parents. The same week, the press around the lawsuit found Lumen, 2 of Spencer's investors, the ones he'd flown to Lisbon to charm, pulled their term sheets when the headlines hit. Because nobody wants to fund a wellness founder whose seed money turned out to be stolen from his sister's inheritance. His follower count cratered. The brand partnerships he'd been living on evaporated inside a month. And because the $95,000 had gone into Lumen, the settlement my parents signed required them to claw it back out of the company to pay me. Which meant Spencer's runway, the money he'd been burning on a fancy office and a Lisbon booth, simply vanished. Lumen folded that summer. He had to get a job. I heard, through Marjorie, that he was selling cars at one of my father's old dealership contacts. Steady work? Dependable. I didn't laugh. But I did not laugh either. They settled in 3 weeks at mediation in a neutral building downtown. A retired judge shuttling between 2 rooms because I never once had to be in the same room as them. $208,000. They had one request passed through the mediator: no more press, no more posts. Everyone moves on. Quentin looked at me. I thought about it and said, "Add a term." A written apology, signed by both of them, stating exactly what they did. 30 minutes later, the mediator came back. They agreed. The apology came by certified mail, 1 typed page. We allowed favoritism and pride to guide our actions regarding Camille's trust and her wedding. We violated the duty placed in us by her grandfather. We failed her as parents. We are deeply sorry. I read it once. I felt almost nothing. Miles asked if it was enough. "The money is the justice," I told him. "This is just paper." I put it in a drawer and never answered it. I want to tell you, I agonized over forgiving them. I didn't, and I'm not going to perform that I did. They sent a gift a few weeks later. I shipped it back unopened. My mother left a voicemail asking if we could start fresh. I didn't call back. Months later, this past spring, Marjorie told me my father had started asking, through Russell, whether he'd ever get to meet his grandchild, because by then, I was pregnant, 12 weeks, sick every morning and happier than I'd ever been. I set down my coffee and thought about it honestly. Maybe, I said, if he earns it, actions, not apologies on paper. He knows the difference now. Russell nodded slow. That's fair, kiddo. Miles and I closed on a house in June, 3 bedrooms out toward Somerville, a yard, a porch that catches the evening light. The down payment came out of my grandfather's money, which is exactly what he wrote it down for. To build a home. I think about that line a lot. They tried to turn it into a leash, and it turned out to be a foundation instead. The other night, Miles and I were painting the nursery, a soft, pale yellow, and he had the laptop open on a paint can, drafting our own will. The trust we're setting up for this kid. What do we put in it? He asked. What's the instruction? I thought about my grandfather and about $140,000 meant for a home that got fed to the favorite child while I got a lecture about gratitude. I thought about the empty chairs with the name cards still standing. Put this, I said. Use it to build a life that makes you happy. Not us, you. He wrote it down. If you're listening to this and somebody in your family is using money to control you, or using the word humility to keep you quiet, or using guilt to keep you in line, write things down. Save the texts. Learn what a fiduciary is and whether one of your relatives is supposed to be acting like one. Get a lawyer if the numbers are real, because they are more often than you'd think. And know that the family who stands up and clacks for the truth in a room full of people is just as much yours as the one that walked out the front of it. We're still painting that nursery. My parents don't know the baby's name yet. Neither does Spencer. Some people are born into your family, and some people earn their way in. And after the night 2 chairs sat empty at the front of my wedding, I finally stopped confusing the two. I used to think being the dependable one was a virtue my parents would reward someday. Standing in that bridal suite watching 2 empty chairs hold their name cards, I finally understood I'd been confusing being useful with being loved, and that nobody was ever going to hand me the difference. I had to claim it. Here's what the whole thing taught me about cause and effect, because none of it was random. My parents didn't lose their daughter the night they walked down that aisle and out the door. They lost me over years of small choices. Every Camille's so responsible she doesn't need us. Every dinner thrown for Spencer, and every "that's nice, honey" for me. The boycott was just the bill coming due. And Spencer didn't lose Lumen to bad luck. He lost it because a company built on money taken from someone else can't survive the moment that truth gets spoken out loud. You can't plant a seed in stolen soil and act shocked when the harvest rots. What saved me wasn't anger. It was 3 things I had to grow on the spot. The first was refusing to bend my sense of right and wrong just because the people pressuring me shared my last name. Knowing that loving your family and letting them rob you are not the same loyalty. And being willing to hold that line even when my own father called me selfish in his study. The second was clear thinking, instead of reacting. Miles following the money the way he does for a living. Reading the trust document like a court would. Building a case on paper, instead of screaming across a table. Feelings would have lost that fight. Evidence won it. And the third was the plain stubbornness to keep going when going was the hardest thing, to say please continue to the officiant with my voice steady while my parents' heels clicked toward the exit, to ship the gift back unopened, to not call when the voicemail came asking to start fresh. If you're the unfavorite child in your family, I won't tell you to forgive on a timeline that isn't yours. I'll tell you to write things down, to learn what your rights actually are, and to find the steadiness to stand alone for one hard season. Because the people who stood up and clapped for the truth in that barn turned out to be more my family than the ones who raised me. My grandfather wrote that his money was meant to build a home, They tried to turn it into a leash. I turned it into a foundation. And that choice, more than any apology on paper, is the thing I'm proud of. Some people are born into your family. Some earn their way in. After 2 chairs sat empty at the front of my wedding, I finally stopped confusing the two, and I built a life worth being proud of around the ones who stayed.